In 1978, a car showed up to the Swedish Grand Prix that sounded like a vacuum cleaner, looks like it had been assembled from a fever dream, and was approximately 2 seconds per lap faster than every other car on the track. 2 seconds! In Formula One, a tenth of a second is the difference between a winner and a midfield runner. 2 seconds is from a different dimension. The other drivers said it was unsafe. The stewards reviewed the rulebook and concluded it technically didn't violate the letter of the regulations. It won the race. It was then immediately and voluntarily withdrawn from competition by its own team. It was never beaten. It went home undefeated. This is the story of motorsport's most dangerous, most brilliant, and most banned machines. The cars that didn't just outrun their opponents, but outran the rulebook itself. We're ranking them from the rules caught up eventually, all the way to the entire category was abolished because the body count was real. Let's go.
In 1976, Tyrrell racing designer Derek Gardner concluded that 4 normal-sized front tires were an aerodynamic liability. A wide front axle created drag, a narrow one reduced stability. The problem felt unsolvable, until Gardner decided the solution was to use more wheels. 6 of them. 4 small tires at the front, 2 standard tires at the rear. The smaller front wheels reduced frontal area and aerodynamic drag, while the additional tire contact patches theoretically improved braking and cornering grip. This was the Tyrrell P34. It is the only 6-wheeled car in Formula One history to have actually raced, and it worked. In the 1976 Swedish Grand Prix, Tyrrell drivers Jody Scheckter and Patrick Depailler finished first and second. A 6-wheeled car stood on the top 2 steps of an F1 podium. The motorsport world did a collective double-take. The problem that killed the P34 wasn't the concept, it was the tires. Tyrrell was running on Goodyear compounds, and the small-diameter front tires required for the 6-wheel layout needed specific development resources that Goodyear chose to allocate elsewhere, toward conventional 4-tire designs that served the rest of the grid. By 1977, the P34's front tires were developing slower than the competition. The car that had seemed like the future was being beaten by the present. Tyrrell shelved the project. Ferrari and Williams both explored their own 6-wheeled concepts, designs with 4 rear wheels instead of 4 front wheels, intended to multiply traction at the driven axle. Neither made it to a race. The FIA banned all multi-wheel configurations in 1983 before any of them could embarrass the sport by actually working. The P34 was not banned for being too fast. It was too interesting to ignore and not developed enough to maintain. It sits in a museum in Donington now, still the most surreal thing to have ever legally competed in Formula One.
In 1977, Colin Chapman, the Lotus founder, who famously described his design philosophy as simplify, then add lightness, presented the Lotus 78. The car looked unusual. Its side pods were shaped like inverted wings. This was not an accident. Chapman and designer Peter Wright had discovered something that would transform Formula One entirely. If you shape the underfloor of a racing car correctly, you can accelerate airflow beneath the car, reduce the air pressure underneath it relative to above, and generate enormous downforce without the drag penalty of large external wings. This is called ground effect, and the Lotus 78 was the first car to use it as a primary design principle. The concept worked so well that Chapman refined it further into the Lotus 79. Mario Andretti drove the Lotus 79 to the 1978 World Championship. Ronnie Peterson finished second. Lotus was so far ahead of the field that championship rival Carlos Reutemann, driving a Ferrari, was publicly mystified about how to close the gap. By 1979, every team had grasped what Chapman had done and built their own ground effect cars. Cornering speeds rose to levels that alarmed everyone who understood what was happening. Cars were generating several times their own weight in downforce. Drivers were pulling G-forces previously associated with military aircraft. Then teams discovered the failure mode. Ground effect works only when the car maintains a consistent seal between its underfloor and the road surface. If the car bounces or catches a bump, or the skirts that channel the airflow lose contact, downforce disappears instantly, not gradually, instantly. a car generating 2,000 pounds of downforce at 160 miles per hour that then loses all downforce without warning, handles in a way that no driver on Earth has time to respond to. Several incidents in 1979 and 1980 demonstrated this failure mode in ways that ended careers and nearly ended lives. The FIA banned flexible skirts in 1981 and mandated flat underfloors in 1983, effectively ending the ground effect era in its most extreme form. Ground effect returned, partially in modified and controlled ways, to Formula One in 2022. The FIA spent years developing a version they could allow without recreating the catastrophic failure modes of the original cars. 40 years of careful regulation to contain an idea that one designer developed in a drawing office in Hethel, Norfolk.
Jim Hall's Chaparral team from Midland, Texas was one of the most original engineering operations in motorsport history. The 2E introduced an automatically adjustable rear wing controlled by the driver's left foot in 1966, a decade before active aerodynamics became common. The 2F ran at Le Mans with an enormous overhead wing at a time when aerodynamics were barely understood. But the 2J, built for the 1970 Can-Am season, was the most radical thing the team ever attempted. The Chaparral 2J was powered by a Chevrolet V8 at the rear and two additional two-stroke snowmobile engines borrowed from Avertech at the front. These snowmobile engines did nothing for propulsion. Their entire purpose was to drive two fans that continuously pumped air out from underneath the car through a system of sliding polycarbonate skirts. The effect was a partial vacuum beneath the car. The air pressure above the car pushed it downward constantly, regardless of speed. This was called suction-based downforce, and it had a property that no wing-based downforce could match. It worked at 0 miles per hour. Conventional wings need airspeed. A car traveling slowly through a corner generates less downforce than the same car at speed. The driver must manage this, being careful in slow corners, knowing more grip is available in fast ones. With the 2J, the grip level was constant. Slow corner, fast corner, braking zone, the suction worked the same. Drivers who tested it reported that it felt like the car was glued to the road. The time it should have saved per lap was enormous. It was also incredibly complex, broke down frequently, and required development resources Chaparral didn't have. The team ran it throughout 1970 with mixed results. Fast when it worked, unreliable when it didn't. Competitors complained loudly. SCCA banned it at the end of the 1970 season on the grounds that the suction fans constituted a movable aerodynamic device. Jim Hall disputed this characterization until the end of his life. The fans removed air, they didn't redirect it. He argued the car was using vacuum, not aerodynamics. The regulators weren't interested in the distinction. The concept was banned. 8 years later, Gordon Murray would attempt a cleaner version of the same idea in Formula One, win once, and face the same outcome. Gordon Murray is arguably the greatest Formula One designer who ever lived. He designed the McLaren F1 road car, the McLaren MP44 that went 15-0 in the 1988 season, and a dozen other landmark machines. But the car he talks about with the most mixture of pride and frustration is the Brabham BT46B. It's also the only Formula One car in history to race, win, and retire without ever losing. Murray's problem in 1978 was Lotus. Colin Chapman's ground effect cars were destroying the field. Murray needed a response that could compete without copying, because copying Lotus would just produce an inferior version of the Lotus. He needed something different. He built a fan into the back of the car. The BT46B had a large horizontal fan driven off the engine, positioned at the rear and designed to extract air from underneath the car and expel it out the back. The lowered pressure beneath the car pressed it to the track, generating mechanical downforce without wings. Murray was careful about the legal framing. The Lotus skirts and ground effect cars worked by shaping the underfloor. The FIA was considering rules to address this. But the BT46B's fan was, Murray argued, primarily a cooling device that provided downforce as a secondary benefit. Cooling fans were permitted. The regulations did not specifically prohibit fans. The car debuted at the Swedish Grand Prix in 1978. Niki Lauda drove it. He drove through the field from 5th place and won comfortably, pulling away from the competition in a way that made the cars behind him look like they were on a different track. The complaints started before the race was over. The FIA examined the car. They did not immediately disqualify it. The Swedish Grand Prix results stood. But Brabham team owner Bernie Ecclestone, who by 1978 was also the commercial rights holder of Formula One and understood that his personal financial interests were tied to the sport being entertaining and competitive, voluntarily withdrew the BT46B from all future racing. His stated reason? He didn't want to run a car that other teams thought was illegal.
His probable reason: he was building Formula One into a commercial empire, and a car that won every race was bad for business. The FIA subsequently banned movable aerodynamic devices more explicitly. The BT46B was never challenged in racing again. It retired with a 100% win rate. 46 years later, Gordon Murray still talks about it with the quiet satisfaction of a man who solved a problem so completely that the world had to change the problem.
Group B Rally, the category that had to be abolished. Most entries on this list are one car. Group B was an entire class of motorsports so catastrophically dangerous that they didn't ban individual cars, they banned the class. The World Rally Championship introduced Group B regulations in 1982. Manufacturers had to build just 200 road-legal examples of a vehicle to homologate a racing version, a low bar that was basically an invitation to build whatever they wanted. Power, weight, and technology were largely unrestricted. What followed was 4 years of the most spectacular and dangerous motorsport that has ever existed. The Audi Quattro Sport S1 E2 produced approximately 600 horsepower and weighed around 1,000 kilograms, about the same weight as a modern Mini Cooper with 4 times the power, and the Quattro four-wheel drive system that gave it traction no two-wheel drive rally car could match. Its acceleration from a standstill to 100 km per hour took under 3 seconds. The Peugeot 205 T16 was mid-engined, four-wheel drive, and so aggressively turbocharged that the power delivery was described by drivers as binary: nothing, 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 then everything at once. It won the Manufacturers' Championship in 1985 and 1986. The Lancia Delta S4 ran both a turbocharger and a supercharger simultaneously. The supercharger provided immediate response at low engine speeds. The turbocharger delivered peak power at high revs. Combined, it meant the S4 had no RPM range at which it wasn't producing alarming amounts of power. Drivers called it the most violent car they had ever sat in. The Ford RS200, the MG Metro 6R4, and the Citroën BX4TC rounded out a field of monsters. These were 500-plus horsepower rally cars driven through narrow forest tracks, over loose gravel mountain passes, through crowds of spectators standing inches from the route, protected by a line of tape. In April 1986, Joaquim Santos lost control of his Ford RS200 on a public road section of the Portuguese rally and drove into a crowd of spectators. 3 people were killed. Dozens were injured. The event was stopped. Teams from multiple manufacturers withdrew in protest. The WRC continued to the next event. In May 1986, Henri Tovenil and his co-driver Sergio Cresto left the road in their Lancia Delta S4 during the Tour de Corse in Corsica. The car went over a cliff, landed in a ravine, and burned. The fire was so intense and complete that crash investigators could initially determine very little about the accident. Both men died. Group B was terminated at the end of the 1986 season. The cars that had been developed for it were sometimes used in competition elsewhere, in American off-road racing, in later Group A events, but never again in the environment for which they had been designed. The Group B era lasted 4 years. In those 4 years, motorsport reached a level of speed, technology, and collective insanity that it has spent the decades since carefully ensuring it never approaches again. When engineers talk about Group B today, they speak with a very specific combination of awe and discomfort that you only hear from people who know exactly how close things came to going completely wrong.
The Porsche 917, the car that made Le Mans afraid. In 1969, Porsche unveiled a car so powerful that the organizers of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, a race that had already seen numerous fatal accidents and was not known for excessive caution, looked at it and had a serious internal discussion about whether to allow it to compete. They allowed it. The original Porsche 917 had a 4.5-liter flat 12 engine producing around 580 horsepower. In an era when most sports cars produced between 250 and 400 horsepower, this was extraordinary. The car was also aerodynamically unstable at high speed in its original specification. It generated insufficient downforce and, above a certain velocity, wanted to take flight. Early test drivers reported that it was genuinely frightening. Ferdinand Piëch, the engineer who led development and who would later become one of the most powerful figures in the automotive industry as head of Volkswagen Group, conducted his own test sessions. The accounts of those sessions, filtered through the recollections of people who were present, suggest that the experience was formative in ways not entirely positive. They kept developing it. By 1970, with significant aerodynamic revisions and with John Wyer's Gulf Porsche team and drivers including Joe Siffert, Brian Redman, and Pedro Rodriguez, the 917 was dominant. It won Le Mans in 1970 and 1971. The turbocharged 917-10 and 917-30 variants that followed for North American Can-Am racing were something else entirely. The 917-30 produced approximately 1,100 horsepower in race trim from 1973. A turbocharged racing car with 1,100 horsepower running on the open tracks of Canadian and American circuits, driven by men who apparently had no functioning fear response. The 917-30's dominance in Can-Am was so complete that attendance dropped. Spectators stopped coming because the race had no competition. Mark Donohue won 6 of 8 races in the 917-30 season. The series was structured around multiple manufacturers competing, and only one manufacturer was actually in the fight. SCCA and FIA rules changes for the following season effectively made the 917 class ineligible. The car was regulated out of competition. The 917 is the subject of Steve McQueen's film Le Mans, which features approximately 35 minutes of plot and 75 minutes of engines. It is the greatest racing car film ever made if you love racing cars, and the worst film ever made if you need things like characters or dialogue.
The Mercedes W196, the car Mercedes banned themselves. In 1954, Mercedes-Benz returned to Formula One after an absence of 15 years with the W196, a car so technically advanced that it made the rest of the field look like it was competing in a different decade, which it essentially was. The W196 had fuel injection at a time when virtually no racing car used it. The inline 8-cylinder engine was mounted at an angle to lower the center of gravity. In its streamlined bodywork form, the entire car was enclosed in smooth aluminum, presenting a reduced frontal profile to the air. Juan Manuel Fangio won the 1954 and 1955 World Championships in the W196. Mercedes won 9 of the 12 races they entered in 2 seasons. Then came Le Mans. On June 11, 1955, Pierre Levesque's Mercedes entered a section of the circuit near the pits at the same moment that Lance Macklin's Austin Haley moved to avoid another car. The contact launched the Mercedes into the air. It hit an earth bank and disintegrated. Levesque was killed. Debris, including the engine, bonnet, and suspension components, flew into the spectator area. 83 people died. It remains the deadliest accident in motorsport history. Mercedes withdrew from the race immediately, then from all motorsport, not just from the 1955 season, from racing entirely. They didn't return to Formula One as a factory team for decades. No regulator banned the W196. No rule change forced Mercedes out. The company made the decision itself in response to a disaster at an event they were leading when it happened. The car was at no point slower than its competition. It remains one of the most successful Grand Prix cars ever built across the seasons it competed. Mercedes banned it. Mercedes banned themselves. That is by some margin the most consequential self-imposed withdrawal in motorsport history. The McLaren MP44 was not banned. No regulator could find a reason to ban it because it didn't exploit any loophole. It wasn't faster due to a clever technical trick that violated the spirit of the rules. It was faster because Honda built an engine that produced more power than anything else available, and Gordon Murray and Steve Nichols designed a chassis that used that power more efficiently than any car had previously. In 1988, the MP44 won 15 of 16 races. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, the 2 best drivers on Earth at the time, teammates, finished first and second in the Drivers' Championship. Senna won 8 races. Prost won 7. The only race that McLaren didn't win, Senna retired from the lead. The car was so dominant that the year is remembered not for any competitive story, but simply as the year that dominance itself became the story. There was no championship fight. There was one team. There was nothing else worth discussing. FIA regulations for 1989 banned the turbocharged engines that Honda had developed, mandating a return to naturally aspirated power across the grid. The MP44 was made ineligible not for being dangerous, not for violating regulations, but for making the sport genuinely boring in its most fundamental function, competition. They changed the rules because there was nothing else worth changing. Senna called it the best car he ever drove. Prost called it the most capable racing car in history. Neither of them could explain what else to do with a car that good except drive it. The final ranking, most innovative concept, the Brabham BT46B. Won once, went home, never lost. A car that retired undefeated from a sport where finishing a race is itself considered an achievement. Most dangerous, Group B Rally. Not a single car, but an entire category that produced the most spectacular racing of the 20th century and was shut down after it killed the people driving the cars and the people watching them. Most consequential withdrawal, the Mercedes 196W, a car pulled from competition not by regulators, but the manufacturer's own conscience after an event it had nothing to do with causing. Most complete domination, the McLaren MP44, a car so good that when the season was over, the FIA changed the rules not because the car had broken any, but because it had made competition irrelevant. But the real story of every car on this list is the same story. Every time engineers find a breakthrough that works too well, the fan car, ground effect, Group B turbocharging, fuel injection, the Quattro drivetrain, the rulebook in racing is not just a set of constraints, it's a list of ideas that worked so completely that they had to be stopped. And somewhere right now, in a quiet engineering office, someone is reading those rules very carefully.